The House Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation will come to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Representative Puri.
Here.
Representative Morgan.
Here.
Representative Hood. Representative Steckloff.
Present.
Representative Skaggs.
Here.
Representative Steele. Representative Borton.
Here.
Sir, you have 5 of 7 members. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Steckloff moves to approve the minutes from the Transportation Subcommittee meeting from last week on March 6th. Without objection, the minutes are approved. All right, with that, welcome back everyone to everyone's favorite subcommittee. I'm very excited for this hearing today because, and I know at least a few of my colleagues are excited for this one, as we're going to dedicate most of this meeting to conversations revolving public transit. We have a long list of speakers scheduled today, so we're going to try our best to shuffle through and get everyone some time to present. We do have a hard stop later today, but we're going to try sticking to the schedule here. And so we're going to kind of jump into it. We're going to begin by hearing from the Michigan Department of Transportation, the Michigan Department of Transportation Office of Passenger Transportation, and Gene Russman, and the MDOT Office of Rail, and Peter Annerster. Hopefully I got those names right. And whenever you're all ready, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for inviting us to speak to you today. And it is my favorite subcommittee, so I agree with you there. I'm just going to take a few minutes to explain to you what the Office of Passenger Transportation does, a few of our exciting projects, and a few of our pain points. And I'll try to speak quickly because I know that we have a lot of people to get through today. So the primary functions of the Office of Passenger Transportation, or OPT, as we call ourselves, is oversight of public transportation and shared mobility. That includes local transit, specialized service, marine passenger, public marine passenger, intercity bus, ride sharing, and van pooling. We receive and distribute state and federal funds. We oversee the subrecipient expenditures because we do provide matching funds for the federal funds. So even if we don't directly receive the federal funds, we still make sure that the state funds are being utilized properly. We're also responsive to federal mandates, so we make sure that all the transit agencies and our office are in compliance, especially our subrecipients. And we try to partner with providers and stakeholders. We are a part of the public transit team in this state. For private bus carriers, we do also have a role, which is little known. We do regulatory oversight of Public Act 432, Motor Bus Transportation Act. We conduct vehicle safety inspections on private motor coaches to make sure that it's just the safety of the buses. So just to make that clear, it's not drivers that we are overseeing on there. And we provide service to them to make sure they know how to maintain their vehicles, that they know how to do that important piece of staying in business. We try to help them stay in business, not put them out of business. So there are several state programs that I'm sure you're all aware of that we receive as line item appropriations in the budget, local bus operating, which I will be talking more about later when we talk about pain points, transit capital, marine passenger, again, that's the public ferry boat systems. Right now, they're just in northern Michigan. Intercity bus, we do contract for the northern routes in the state because those were abandoned by the private industry. They simply weren't profitable, but they provide an essential link for people to the national network. The specialized service / transportation to work program are 2 lines that we combined into one to better match where the federal funds were. Specialized service is a 100% state-funded operating program for more of the human service type agencies that are focused more on the needs of seniors and people with disabilities, but are still open door public transit. And the ride sharing and van pooling, we do operate and contract out for the Michivan program, and hopefully some of you have seen those Michivans around the state. We help subsidize those so people can have a consistent shared ride into primarily work. Some do use it for school as well. And then service initiatives is the funds that we use to do the more innovative projects, to test out new technology, to help people try innovative service models, and also to really focus on regional transportation. I will not go through this list, but this is the list of federal programs, and these are just mostly the formula programs that second to last line, discretionary grant programs. There are an endless number of discretionary grants now under the IIJA or bill, whichever you'd prefer to call it. So many, many programs that we administer the funds for the rural agencies for and provide match for all transit agencies. So we're working on a lot of special projects right now. We have a couple different mobility challenges going right now. The one that's been in operation for a little while, and one of the recipients is out doing their thing, is a mobility wallet, which is basically utilizing a virtual wallet to help access multiple funding sources to get people where they need to be in the most efficient, effective manner. We are awaiting proposals on another challenge, the $15 million Equitable Mobility Challenge, where we actually combined different sources of funding. We received a line item in our budget. Some of it was at the request of MEDC, the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, so we partnered with them, and we had some ongoing program funding that we want to do two things with that. There's two paths. One is to expand specialized service. There are a lot of mobility gaps still out there, and if we can at least fill some of those gaps with that program, we want to do that. And the other is just any kind of innovative project that will fill any mobility gap, even if it's not focused on seniors and people with disabilities and veterans. So that program is out there. We're doing a little bit different take on that. We're actually funding the first 3 years of that service at a much higher rate to help them be able to establish the service, get the capital they need, and get public support, because after this program ends, there may be some state funds, but they will need to generate local funds to keep this service going. And that 3 years is a model that we used way back in the day when we were first starting up agencies, and the federal government actually has started using more and more for their programs. So those are the two highlights of challenges. There's always challenges. We're doing the RUC research, which I presented to this group 2 weeks ago, I believe. The road use charging research project that we're doing is still growing strong. We have closed the survey window on that now, and we were incredibly pleased with the number of validated survey results we have. We have over 19,000 survey results that we were able to validate and make sure they were not bots and they weren't people just trying to play with us, so that we are hearing from real Michiganders who are really interested in this topic. So we're excited to be moving on with that project. We have a SMART grant, which is one of those many federal programs, and that is aimed at helping the rural agencies produce and capture GTFS, General Transportation, it's a specification feed. It's what helps get their data into things like the transit app or the MOS platform that we are creating. It helps make their data more accessible and visible to the public. So we are excited to have received the first round of that grant, and hopefully we'll receive the second round to expand it across the rural agencies. We are still members of the Automated Bus Consortium, who are looking at testing out a full-size automated bus in different settings. We are going back out to bid for that soon. The first one gave us a ton of information, and part of the information was that the industry simply wasn't ready for it yet, that the vehicle industry wasn't ready for it yet. And we've modified, and the industry has changed, and we're going back out to bid after talking to the industry again to get an update on where they're at. The MOS platform is, I guess I'd like you to think of it as kind of the transit app, but for Michigan and transit first. So we are going out to bid for a statewide platform that will allow all the public transit agencies to link any of their programs to it, so people can, when they come to Michigan, they can go to one app and get connected wherever they want to go in the state. They can at least get information on what's available there. Economic benefit analysis tool is just what it sounds like. We're working on that, and we are implementing a new transit management system to replace the one that is at least 30 years old. So we're updating that, and we're in the midst of that exciting project. So let's get on to the important part, funding needs and pain points. Local bus operating assistance reimbursement rates. We received all the budgets for FY25 from our transit agencies. They were due February 1st. We have them all in place now. We used those numbers and the executive budget for FY25 to run estimates on what the local bus reimbursement rate is, I kind of felt sick when I saw them, to be quite honest. As you know, the Act 51 allows up to 50% for the large urbans and up to 60% for everybody else, basically. And those percentages, based on that estimate for FY25, would be 30.9% for the 60% group and 26.7% for the 50% group. I've never seen those percentages that low. I've already heard from a couple of transit agencies that it will be devastating for them. They will have trouble. Many of them will probably have to cut services and possibly cut employees with the percentage that low. And mind you, that's on top of, we had received some federal funds to prop up their 5311 operating, their other operating assistants. That prop up is gone. Those funds are gone. So it's definitely what I would consider a crisis for the transit agencies in the state. And it's really, that was because of two things. Some of them grew, and we had, a new millage, which is awesome, in Wayne, Oakland, Macomb. Never want to say that's a bad thing. That was incredible. The RTA is expanding service and making better connections throughout Southeast Michigan. But the growth wasn't just on that urban side, the growth was also on the rural side. So we actually had a 9% growth in budgets on both the urban and rural side of that. And at the same time, we had a one-time general fund prop up of the LBO in the current year, $45 million, that we do not have anymore. So between those funds going down and the budgets going up, it was a pretty devastating drop. The current percentages, gosh, and I have got too many percentages in my head, but they're much higher. They're 42%, I believe, for the rural agencies, going down to just under 31%. So quite devastating. Procurements continue to be not only complex because of all the state and federal requirements, but also we are still suffering from supply chain, especially on buses. We have buses that have been on order for well over 2 years that have not been delivered. So we are struggling with just receiving buses, but also the whole procurement process is very, very difficult. Our office is trying to take on more of that burden and trying to provide more assistance, and we're looking into the ways that My Deal might be able to come in and help, and that's a long story that I won't get into. The transit vehicle prices are also going up. We have been having to add money to existing contracts for transit agencies just so they can get the same bus that they requested several years ago because, again, supply chain, we'll just say that. So it's costing a lot of money, and we're spending a lot of our money just completing the funding of previously funded buses, and then we still have other buses that are aging out. So we are trying to get on top of that. We think we have a good plan in place, but good plans don't always work out. But we're going to try our best to get the industry in good shape. And as you saw by that list of federal programs, there is an increasing number of federal programs, which is a great thing, but also a difficult thing. And it's not just the USDOT. Luckily, there are other programs and other departments that have funding programs that now realize that including public transit as an eligible recipient gets people to be able to take avail of the projects that are being put in place, and that we are part of the climate fix. So there's a ton of different federal programs. My staff has not changed much, right? So it's a lot of work to apply for those funds, to then administer the grants and administer the resulting contracts with agencies for those. So it's a blessing and a curse. I believe that is all I had, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter.
I'll just reach. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me in today. I'm Peter Annister with MDOT's Office of Rail, and I'm excited to be here. There's a lot going on in rail, and I want to share a few of those things with you today. Our office really has a focus of really moving more freight and passengers by rail in Michigan. So when we wake up every day, that's what we're really looking forward to in our office, of what can we do and how do we support those activities to kind of meet those goals. This is a quick overview of really our major functions within our office. We obviously oversee the intercity passenger service that is operated by Amtrak here in Michigan. We have some freight rail development programs, and I'll get into specifics on some of these going forward here to really support the freight industry. Up to 20% of the nation's freight moves by rail, so obviously it's an important part of our economy. And it's vitally important here in Michigan as well, and we want to make sure we can support those efforts. Michigan actually owns some rail assets. We own about 600 miles of railway here in the state. That's a little bit unique, so we do manage those assets. We also have some functions around all of our public railroad crossings. So we have about 4,400 crossings in Michigan. We inspect all of those crossings to make sure they're safe. So that's a big piece of what we do. We also have some oversight on railroad worker safety. So that's some things that we do to make sure our railroad workers are safe. We also, interestingly, have some safety oversight responsibilities of our 2 fixed rail systems here in Michigan. So that's the Detroit People Mover and the Q Line, both in Detroit. We have a state safety officer on our team that oversees the safety elements of those operations. And like Gene, we're doing a lot of work managing federal grant portfolios. So rail at the federal level does not have any formula fundings. So everything that we do through grants is a competitive grant. That's obviously, we've been very successful with that here in Michigan, but as Gene says, it takes lots of resources and administration to do that. Just a quick overview of our rail system. There's about 3,600 miles of rail corridor in Michigan. About 29 railroads operate within our state, including Amtrak. As mentioned, 665 of those miles are owned by the state of Michigan. So we manage those segments of rail. We do have 3 intercity passenger rail routes in Michigan. And we also have 3 rail locations where we have international border crossings. So definitely a vibrant system here in Michigan. I was going to start off a little bit on our crossing programs. We have a couple different grant programs related to crossings. The first is really focused on safety enhancements. So when you see the lights and gates and the active warning systems, we are always looking at ways to increase safety at all of our crossings. So each year we'll take a look at where we have, I guess, the most incidents at a crossing or where we think we can have the most impact on increasing safety. And we'll provide some grant funding to make those upgrades at those crossings. We also have a surface program. All of us, I'm sure, have driven over a crossing or 2 in our state that's a little bit more bumpier than we like. So there's a lot of crossings out there. We do have a grant program where we do fund the resurfacing and improvements of those surfaces and on local grade crossings. So that's a big program for us as well. We do a few crossing eliminations. We always look for that opportunity that the safest crossing we can have is one that doesn't exist. So that is something we do to put funding towards as well. That's mostly a locally driven process. If really that's got to be something that the locals want to do and find acceptable in their communities, but we do have some funding that we can support those projects with. And then there's grade separation projects. So obviously there's been some funding appropriated the last couple of years for grade separations. We really look at those as more of a road project in the Office of Rail, but obviously there's a lot of involvement from the railroads on those projects. So that's something we assist with as well in regards to crossings. On the freight side, we really have 2 programs that I thought were worth mentioning. The first is our Freight Economic Development Program. So think of this as really grants that go to shippers or companies that want to access rail. So maybe they're located adjacent to a rail line, but they don't have a spur line or a turnout. This program can be used to offset up to 50% of the cost of putting in a turnout or a spur line so they can access the rail system here in Michigan. And then a new program that just was launched last year, the Michigan Rail Enhancement Program. This is a program that provides grants to any railroad here in Michigan to look at safety improvements, capacity improvements, efficiency improvements, but anything that we think can have a good impact on shippers and people using our rail system here in Michigan. So the map up here, you'll see some of the locations in the last couple years that have projects funded under these two programs. Just today, I think we're announcing the FY24 awardees for the Michigan Rail Enhancement Program. So there's 11 projects and a little over $20 million that's going to be awarded to railroads in Michigan this year for that program. So pretty exciting about that. We do have two existing grants on the freight rail side. One is to do bridge and track upgrades on some of our state-owned lines between Ann Arbor and Traverse City. That was a 2021 CRISI grant. And then in 2022, we also received a CRISI grant to replace the Manistee River Bridge, which is up in northern Michigan, and a key connection point up to Traverse City. So those are active projects that we are secured federal funding for. Future opportunities, we're really putting a focus on making some additional improvements to the Detroit Intermodal Freight Terminal in Detroit. We're likely to seek some federal funding in some upcoming rounds for that project. And then really we're going to put a focus on bridge replacements. We have a lot of really old bridges on our railways here in Michigan. So we need to find ways to start replacing those and refurbishing those. On the Amtrak side, you'll see we have 3 routes here in Michigan. The green line from Grand Rapids that goes into Chicago is our Pierre Marquette route. The blue line from Port Huron to Chicago is our Blue Water route. And then the red line is our Wolverine, and that services Pontiac, Detroit to Chicago. We have 5 round-trip frequencies on those routes currently. So 1 round trip on the Pierre Marquette and the Blue Water, and then 3 current round trips on the Wolverine, all of those going to Chicago and back. We have 22 station communities that are active on those routes, and we've made a lot of investments. Communities have made a lot of investments in some of the station facilities in those communities. So that's really an important connection point. And I wanted to point out that all of our services here in Michigan are under what's called Amtrak state-supported services. So any route in the country that's less than 750 miles falls under a state-supported route. And that basically means the state is responsible for funding that route. So any costs that exceed ticket revenue that's brought in for those routes, Michigan provides that difference through state funding. Amtrak also has long-distance routes, and then the Northeast Corridor. Those are funded more through federal resources on those routes. But there's about 20 states in the country that have these state-supported services. A really quick view is ridership. We were pretty steady around 800,000 riders a year. We did have a dip with COVID that obviously impacted our ridership, but as you can see, we're gaining pretty close, getting back up to those pre-COVID levels. I'm hopeful in this fiscal year that we get there. We did see last October, we had the highest ridership we've ever had in October, so there is definitely lots of demand out there for rail, and we'll continue to keep pushing forward. I'm also excited to say that we have some new equipment in Michigan that we share with 3 other Midwest states, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Missouri. The passenger cars on the left are called venture cars. We just, this past couple months, placed the last of those new venture cars into service in the Midwest. And on the right is our Charger locomotives. Those have all been placed into service a couple years ago. We do have 16 cafe cars that will be placed into service this fiscal year, so in 2024. So that's the last piece of this, this new equipment that will be put into place on all the Midwest routes, including Michigan. Some of the activities that we're doing on the passenger side, we have 6 active FRA grants related to our passenger routes. You can see some of those activities. There's bridge and track improvements, curve modifications, safety enhancements, track equipment resiliency. So all those are in process now. The big news is that Michigan in December was selected all 3 of our existing routes for the Corridor Identification Program. So this is a program that will allow us to enter into a federal program that will provide federal funding to really develop a service development plan for each of our 3 existing routes. And this will allow us to look at how do we continue to make improvements and efficiencies on those routes to increase reliability, while also looking at increasing frequency on those routes. As part of that, we did apply to, for an extension of on our Wolverine route to really extend service from Detroit into Windsor to really try to connect us to Canada. So that's something that will be part of this corridor ID as well. And then we were also a co-applicant with the Ohio Rail Development Commission on a route between Cleveland, Toledo, and Detroit. And that's important for us because that'll provide a direct easterly connection to Amtrak, where now if you want to go to DC or New York by train, you basically have to go back to Chicago and connect there. In the future, we'll continue to look at grant opportunities, really looking at adding or thinking about some intrastate routes here in Michigan. So that's something that I think we're looking at learning more about and seeing what the demand and how that might look. Station upgrades, bridge replacements, track improvements. These are all needs that we'll continue to have on our state-owned routes and services. So those are a lot of the things we're looking at for grant opportunities. On the regulatory side, I did mention, we have regulatory authority for our public crossings. We are also able to issue maintenance, deficiency, and regulatory orders at those crossings to make improvements. And then mention the railroad worker safety and the safety oversight of our fixed guideway systems. And then final slide, future challenges. Mentioned no federal formula funding for rail. Again, so this makes planning difficult and implementing projects difficult. If you're not quite sure if you're going to get a discretionary grant and when you may get awarded that funding. So that's something we're working at the federal level with a lot of the rail association groups throughout the country. It makes it a little inefficient for resource utilization on those competitive grants. If we do add additional frequencies and routes, we'll need additional funding and equipment for those things. So our equipment that we've got with the Midwest is pretty tight now. And a lot of the routes we use, they're definitely shared routes with freight railroads, so there is some questions of capacity and how that looks in the future if we're adding more passenger routes and they're adding more freight routes. How is that going to really come together? As Gene mentioned, cost escalation is a big thing as well. Our projects are getting more expensive. Rail operations are getting more expensive. So that's a concern for us. And then just capacity constraints, as just mentioned. We want to continue to build out our services, and we need to make sure we can do that seamlessly with our freight railroads here in Michigan and throughout the country. And with that, that is a quick overview of rail.
Great. Thank you both for your presentations. I know we kind of went over 2 different topics there. I think there are some questions that we're going to have here. I asked that my colleagues keep our questions fairly concise, as we're just going to try getting through some questions here. So first up is Rep. Steckloff.
Thank you. I'm kind of in like the worst seat possible. I'm going to run through these questions real quick because they're the same questions I pretty much ask every meeting. How much do we pay Amtrak for the service?
So the cost to Amtrak services every year is probably between 60 and 70 million. So when we take the ticket revenue off of that, generally it's about 20 to 30 million that we need to bring to the table every year to support those services.
And with the closing of the Battle Creek station, does MDOT have a plan for those Michigan workers?
Yeah, so to that point, I guess I'll say a few things. As we very much share the goal of having as many Michigan workers on our Amtrak services as possible. We haven't closed the Battle Creek crew base yet.
Just yet.
But it's always been the vision that if we can get our run time down on that route under 6 hours, we won't need to stop and change crews in Battle Creek, which saves us time and makes our routes more efficiency. And we're very close to that threshold of run times under that amount. So what we've decided to recently is not add additional workers to that crew base, because it's very likely in the near future that we are going to make some adjustments. In talking with Amtrak, it doesn't sound like anyone will necessarily lose their jobs. There's plenty of need within the Amtrak system, and including here in Michigan, to have those workers either work out of the Grand Rapids crew base or the Detroit Pontiac crew base. And obviously, we'd like to see that as well. You know, I guess the big thing is cost consideration. I mean, we have the ability to tell Amtrak, we would like everything we do service with Michigan workers. That, you know, unfortunately may not be the most efficient way to do it, and would probably cost us, you know, additional dollars to do it that way. So we're trying to definitely do a balance of how do we provide an efficient, cost-effective service while promoting as many Michigan workers as we possibly can in our services.
Okay, yeah, Amtrak has told me they're planning on moving everyone to Chicago, so I just want to make sure we're keeping them in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
Then-
love to hear who at Amtrak told you that, because that's not.
Okay, well, we can talk offline about
All right.
that. Rail grade separations, do we have any type of ranking system for which rail grade separation is up next?
We don't, and I guess there's, two reasons why that MDOT doesn't do that. A lot of those are local roads, so it's really a local decision if they feel like there's the need there or not. And then second is, you know, how do you measure that? Is it based on, you know, number of cars per day, number of trains per day, you know, number of blockages per day? Are there other things that can be done to address some of those issues? You know, maybe a yard track needs to be extended, right? So when they're loading or unloading a train, it's not blocking that intersection anymore. So we haven't put together a list of crossings or for grade separations. I know there's a number since I've been on board that have been mentioned, you know, probably 5 or 6 throughout the state that pretty much get mentioned, you know,
Every year.
consistently. And I know there's some funding that's been provided for some of those projects. So unfortunately, I don't know that any of them have the full funding they need to get fully implemented yet.
Do we have anything that's looking at train length to help out some of those rail grade separations, to find out timing that people are being stopped?
We don't, although that's a big discussion point at the federal level, and I think FRA is doing a study now on long train length, so we'll probably follow the lead of FRA on what they find and what they determine for that.
One last question. I know we're running out of time. I've been waiting for you guys. With the rail safety, we have a few areas that have absolutely no safety along some of the major cities and the rail. For instance, I just went to Albion to check it out because I hear a lot of complaints over there, and that is, I'm surprised there's not more deaths there. It is one of the most dangerous places I've ever seen on our rail crossing. Is there any plans to fix that?
Yes, one of our active federal grants is a safety enhancement grant along the Michigan line to really look at what we can do to increase safety. And coincidentally, we were just literally in Albion on Monday, meeting with them with kind of
Okay,
a
good.
final plan for what that may look like in Albion. So they are part of that active federal grant, along with Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, Kalamazoo, Jackson, really a lot of the communities along that higher speed rail line.
It's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Sure, and
Thanks, Chair.
happy to meet and answer any other questions.
Rep. Steele.
Thank you. A follow-up question with Amtrak. I heard that you guys are, the Wolverine is removing 2 trips, and I just want to know if that is going to save us some money in the budget. And I have a question about the rail freight funding too, about how that's given to private entities for their economic development or whatever it is. And I'm wondering how much of our Public Act 51 on an annual basis is going into these private funded railroad cars or whatever they are. Who determines that and how much money is given to that? So it's actually 3 questions.
For the sake of time, let's just limit it to one.
How much money and who gets it?
Yeah, so the MREP program, there was a boilerplate requirement that we spent. Last year was 21.5 million. This year it's 20 million. So that's kind of the threshold that's in boilerplate for what has to be spent for freight. We also, in addition to that, from the Freight Economic Development Program, there's probably an additional 5 million that would be spent on projects that would support, shippers and that.
So 26 million.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Rep. Hood.
Thank you, Chairman Puri. I have a question for Jean in regard to federal funding. You stated that additional bus funds are being provided through other federal departments, and your department is struggling to track and obtain those. Those are words that make me shudder. I hate the idea of leaving federal dollars, especially for transit, on the table in Washington, D.C. What kind of and feel free to get back to me offline on this, but what kind of supports does your department need to be able to review and competitively apply for every available penny?
Yep, I would love to give you more information offline. I mean, we are looking at our organizational in our office, like what other positions do we need? Because part of that is also then if we get a grant, we have to go through the procurement, and so then we need help in that, and we're trying to shuffle. We did just, via a contract, hire a grant writer to help us with at least the grant writing portion of that. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to be resourceful and partner with others, but definitely additional staff would be very helpful to be able to maintain, because, like I said, once we get the federal grant, then we have to administer those funds. So that's a whole nother, thing on top of that. So honestly, additional staff members would be very welcome to help have the capacity to do that. With that said, we do get some support from the other areas of the department when there are different entities that we're working with. Folks on the other sides help us when they can. They're also busy working on their own funds.
In terms of reaching out to potential contractors, the space where organizations, businesses are forming to research grant opportunities and viability, I think has grown significantly and might be a nice complement to your grant writer. I would recommend looking into those types of services to expand capacity as well.
We actually went out to bid at one point to do that. It was more than my budget could handle.
Okay.
But we are trying to utilize more of like AASHTO and some of the other organizations to actually at least vet, so we can more quickly know if we qualify or if any of our agencies qualify.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Thank you
Great.
for that.
Thank you.
Rep. Skaggs.
Thank you, Chair. I got a deal. We'll just make 2 comments and no questions. Rep. Hood and I come from Kent County. That's 670,000 people and 1 million in West Michigan. You take a look at that map, obviously, of rail. Peter, this is for you, and you see, well, it's not a question, it's just a comment. And you'll see that I think this is wonderful that you have identified that we should be able to get to Toledo and Cleveland to make our way to the East Coast, as opposed to going to Chicago to make our way to the East Coast. As you do your studies, I would implore you to come up with the idea that the 2nd largest city in Michigan, that's the 4th largest county in Michigan, ought not to have to travel by rail to Michigan City to make its way to Kalamazoo or Ann Arbor or Detroit, but that we find some way to link us quickly to the federal high-speed rail network so that we can use the engine of the region that is actually growing in the state to link it together with Chicago, with Detroit, and then the program to link us into Canada is key. We have two megapolises in this area, Toronto and Chicago, and we are nicely in the middle of them. I want to make sure that that Grand Rapids and Kent County and West Michigan are able to really be a functioning part of this rail system. I think you will find that there will be a lot of ridership, a lot of business ridership to get to both of these locations. Second, for Gene, this is sort of a question, but to save time, I won't expect an answer. You talked about automated and autonomous buses, but mentioned that they were full size.
So we're doing both. So the Automated Bus Consortium is a consortium of many states working together. That is looking at full size, but we're also involved with groups and with our own projects that are looking at small automated vehicles.
Yeah, it just seems to me that part of the reason is the labor reason why we have the big buses, and if we don't need them, and the cost and maintenance for them, and the fact that I think the future is smaller and more frequent. At least I think the future of the study. So I'm glad to hear that you'll be doing that as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you both for your presentation. I actually have said a couple quick thoughts. Gene, on your presentation, it was great to see all the mobility initiatives you all are working on. I know in our budget we funded a couple of initiatives through the Office of Future Mobility, which is, I think, how some of that funding made it your way. There was another line in the budget, not in our budget, for the intermodal capital investment grants. I think it was about $50 million.
Yes.
Has any of that money been allocated?
It hasn't yet. We had to wait and see where a large project was going, and now that that's been determined, Peter and I are actually working together. We've already put a prioritized list of capital needs, and then we're going to work together about how to split those funds, and we definitely plan to have those under contract this fiscal year.
And the second question is, as we talk about the CTF and some of the restrictive nature of that, I hate that we need to kind of compete with bus and rail and some of those things, but how can we more prioritize local bus operating to make sure that it is sufficiently funded?
That's a darn good question. We'd love to have that figured out. I think there are several things that can be done to just protect different people within that pot. And I guess I'll go there because, we need more funds in there in general. But we also have to keep the other parts of our operation. We need to keep transit capital. If you don't have capital, you can't operate. If you don't have operating, there's no need for capital. But there are some major forces, and it does tend to then get to be a competition between different size agencies. We definitely want to see Southeast Michigan grow. That scares the smaller agencies, right? Because that growth impacts the amount that all of them get. Any one agency's growth means the reduction of funds from another agency. So looking at a way to help protect different groups within that while still providing sufficient opportunity for growth, of course, that will take more money. But I would say we might want to look at a way to hold harmless when there's growth. And if that's a separate pot of money to prop up growth, or if it's walls, barriers between the different categories of providers, large urban, small urban, rural systems, that's something to at least consider. I don't know if that's the answer, but I think it's something we need to look at just to help protect others. But I do want to make it clear that all of the programs that we have, all those line items in our state budget, they all serve an important need in the overall transportation network. So I would hate to see one of them gutted to prop up another
Right.
one. So it really is additional funding that would be needed.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you both. We inevitably did go over time, so we're going to play catch-up kind of rest of the way here. So with that, we will jump into the next presentation, which is Harmony Lloyd, the Vice President of Planning and Innovation with SMART, who will be testifying on behalf of the Michigan Public Transit Association.
Members of the committee, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk today. As I was introduced, I am the vice chairperson of the Michigan Public Board, and also the vice president of planning and innovation at SMART. And I will be talking a little bit about the things that Jean talked about, holding harmless, our partner rural agencies that we care so much about throughout my presentation. So just a little bit of context, MPTA represents 60 providers across Michigan. Where you see a bus, that's a transit agency that we represent, and we really work to be the voice of advocacy and support from those very rural, very small systems to the very large systems that provide tens of millions of rides a year and everything in between. So I'm always impressed and always learning from my transit colleagues about the different challenges that we face based on the sizes of our agencies and the populations we serve. So public transit really is a quality of life issue. I think of it more of that than of a transportation issue. I love buses and shelters and everything that goes along with the capital side of transportation. My kids actually tell me I have a weird obsession with bus shelters. But at the end of the day, it's not about the shelters, it's about the people inside of them. And it's about the people inside of the buses, and that's why we're doing this. So we've heard a lot of numbers today. I'm gonna talk about a few numbers, but I really wanna focus more on passengers and hopefully helping you to understand the impact at a very local level that operating dollars have on all of us. So again, Jean covered this, but I'll put it in a way that this is a very simplistic way that us at transit agencies think of our funding. The federal funding we think of as that pays for the buses, for the capital, and it does a pretty good job. They cover 80% of the cost of a bus or of a facility or a capital purchase. And I'd like to skip over state funding for a minute and go down to local funding. Local funding is things like millages, fare box revenue. Some communities use general fund dollars to support their local transit system. And I would say that communities in Michigan do a really good job at this too. I looked it up, and in the past 20 years, 98% of transportation millages have passed across Michigan. So we're talking about a bipartisan support of transit, a recognition in local communities that they have to bring money to the table. They're willing to bring money to the table, and they've continued to do that because they want transit in their community. Just in this presidential primary that just passed, 2 systems passed new millages for their community. So that's brand new local communities that are saying that they will pay their fair share. So skipping back up to state funding, Transit Capital, which Jean mentioned, provides that 20% match to the 80% for federal projects. So the buses, federal puts in 80, state puts in 20%, and they do a great job of that. I believe in the proposed budget, Transit Capital is fully funded this year to a level that will support the agencies in buying the buses. local bus operating, which you've already heard of, LBO, it's commonly referred to. That's where we really need to have some work, and we need to talk about and figure out, because again, all these federal grant programs, all these other departments that are starting to pay for transit that were mentioned, they are paying for capital expenses. They are not offering operating dollars. That's left to the state and to the local municipalities to come up with that money. So I said I would be brief on the numbers, and I will. This is demonstrating just what Jean explained. This is reimbursement levels. So you see there the ceilings across the top of the slide, 60%, 50%. That's where we should be. In an ideal world, that's where a legislature before you came and said that this is where transit should be funded. We have never reached those ceilings. And so you see how the percentages that we do get of our expenses reimbursed have varied over the years. And you see where the proposed 2025 numbers are the lowest they've ever been. And last year, we made so much progress, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So to see this drop like that is so disheartening, because we felt like we were really finally seeing some movement around Michigan embracing transit. So as I said, I'm going to focus on the people side of it. I'm not going to talk about numbers anymore until the very end. But I want to talk about, what does it actually mean? What does LBO mean to transit agencies? And I've heard a lot of people, the common response when somebody says, well, what do operating dollars pay for? We'll say, oh, they pay to keep the lights on. That's the standard response, and that's true. But keeping the lights on obviously isn't compelling enough to keep LBO funded where it should be. So we need to focus a little more, dig a little deeper to explain to you what we do that's more than keeping the lights on. So I have a couple areas that we've focused on, and these are completely coincidental, not at all related to the areas you might serve. So we'll start with Roscommon County. I talked with their executive director, a great guy, and he was sharing that there is no hospital in Roscommon County, and yet seniors are 35% of the population. And he said that oftentimes the seniors have moved to Roscommon, and their children, their grown children, have stayed in the southeastern or southwestern part of Michigan. And so the seniors are left to be independent, but also to deal with medical issues on their own. And so transportation for medical appointments is a huge issue, and transportation for seniors that are discharged from a hospital in another county, sometimes as far as Ann Arbor and Traverse City, they need to be able to get home. And so Roscommon County Transportation Authority has a program to do that. And quite incredibly, ridership has been doubling every year since this service went into effect in 2017 and 18. So, you know, the need is there. If they don't have local bus operating, they can't meet that need. And that's a very real need of people not getting care because they don't have transportation to it, not being able to get home from a hospital that could be hours away from where they live. I think it's also impressive, Roscommon County will pick people up from the hospital 24 hours a day. So they are ready to respond and be nimble in the way that they do. I don't have it on this slide, but I also, in reading the news, saw that there's an Amazon distribution center that's going to be built in Roscommon County. And I don't know if you've heard from them yet, but I promise you that if you haven't, you will. Transportation for their workers will be an issue. I have a lot of experience. All the transit agencies that are represented here have a lot of experience with Amazon and other distribution type businesses that need to bring workers to those jobs, and oftentimes transportation becomes a barrier, and then they look to transit agencies to assist them to get those workers to jobs so that they can run these companies and make money and put money back into your community. The next one is the Ride in Ann Arbor. They are an amazing organization. They passed a significant millage a little while ago that has assisted them in being able to bring a lot of new programs online. One of those, just an example, is, again, the jobs issue. Workers from Ypsilanti cannot get to jobs in Ann Arbor. And so the Ride is starting a new service, the Washtenaw Avenue Express Bus, and it will very conveniently and efficiently be able to open the door for workers to be able to access more job opportunities. And I wanted to say these two last examples are both ones of connecting communities. This should not be considered innovative. Connecting communities and being able to help people to go from one county to another or one large community to another should be what we do. And the idea that these are new programs and that they're still considered innovative shows how much work that we have to do. But what I can tell you is that transit agencies know this, and they know how to fix this problem. It may be in a patchwork solution right now because of the years of underfunding, but we can figure this out. We don't need studies. We don't need councils to tell us to improve transportation. We need dollars to be able to run buses and add buses like this one and pay the driver who drives that bus and the fuel that goes into it. And then we can create you an amazing transportation system in Michigan. The Rapid in Grand Rapids, again, a large agency that provides an array of programs to meet the needs of their citizens. This was one example that I thought was compelling. They had a lot of great stories on their website, so if you haven't been on it, I encourage that you do. But this was a short video. I've screenshotted it about a passenger, a young passenger. This is a real story. Who has autism, and because of Grand Rapids bus system, because of the Rapid, he's able to work. They interviewed his employer, and he does it independently. They also talked to his sister, and she said how much it increases not only his quality of life and independence, but hers too, that she doesn't, that she knows that he can safely get to work, that he can work, and that she can go about the other things she needs to do in her life. And I saw that at the Rapid, 80% of the Rapid's riders through passenger surveys indicated they're using it to get to work. So when you think about an economic driver, this is quite literally an economic driver for people to get to jobs. And finally, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention SMART, my own agency. We are in a growth phase right now, an exciting phase. As you all know, Oakland County passed an all-in millage, and we have been working tirelessly since that millage passed to begin to expand transit. We've had a lot of successes. We've started routes in areas that haven't had transportation in 20, 30, sometimes never in their community. And I've spent a huge amount of time going out in the public, like you all do, and talking to them to ask them what do they want to see, these communities that haven't had transit, what do they envision it looks like? And what strikes me the most is that no one ever says we don't want transit in our community, even if they didn't support the millage when it was being debated. They say, I wasn't a millage supporter, but it's here now, and so now I want to know when you're bringing transit to my community. Or if they already have it, they're saying, how can we get more? How can we get higher frequency? How can we better serve our seniors and the people with disabilities so that they have access all the time and in a safe, efficient way to get to doctor's appointments or the grocery store or other basic needs? So we are developing routes. We're going through a process. It's called SMART smarter mobility. If you hear it, if you're one of the people that represent Metro Detroit, we hope you'll be a part of it. We're not only focused on Oakland, we're looking at Macomb and Wayne communities and making expansions there. And then I'll just mention, one of the things we also hear that I've heard over and over again when I'm out in the community is the importance of those late night hours of operation. Metro Detroit is a second and third shift working community, and so buses that run from 8 to 6 are not going to cut it. They don't meet the need that people have to be able to get off work at midnight and safely get home, or to work the midnight shift and go in at 11 and get off at 7 in the morning and be able to get home. So increasing our hours on all of our routes, increasing our frequency, again, makes that powerful connection for people to be able to work and to live really productive lives and put back into the system that this supports. Here's just a few examples of things that are outside of the, the people examples that I've talked about, although they still connect to that, and they look at the way transits are being innovative to meet needs. Route expansion, I talked about it a lot in Metro Detroit. I'd be happy to go into much more detail for anyone who wants to know that outside of this. Medical transportation is such a major issue, and as Michigan continues to have an aging population that's growing, that issue is not going to go away. It's going to continue to get bigger. And I will say, as somebody who's a caregiver for my parents, it's not just an issue for the baby boomers, it's an issue for the Gen X population that is running all of their parents to doctor's appointments all the time. And so it's something that we have to address. There's a few transits that are working on projects where they partner with other organizations to look at putting housing near transit agencies, to provide childcare, community gardens, and these aren't things that transit is paying for, that MDOT is paying for. These are partnerships to be innovative in meeting riders and employees' needs, so that so we have this effective array of options for transit agencies. Smart bus shelters, and I don't mean smart as in smart, I mean smart with the technology that bus shelters are now coming with. Bike racks on buses are so critical. Clean energy, we continue to talk about the best ways to move forward with low emission buses. And looking at the resources we already have, park and rides and carpool lots that MDOT operates, using those as mobility hubs so that buses can pick up passengers who want to carpool into communities for work. We don't need to build a separate lot for that. We can let buses utilize the lot that's already there and put a shelter and some lighting there, and then encourage people to carpool, but do it on a bus. That's really the definition of mass transportation. So I'm almost to the end, but I do want to quickly mention the rural transit funding. We want to continue to expand in Metro Detroit. If you only Google Metro Detroit transportation, you're going to see a ton of articles that say how awful it is. We want to fix that. We know we can fix that, but we don't want to do it at the cost of the rural transit agencies. And if you look at this chart, it's just a quick visualization of what they are facing. In fiscal year 25, you have the federal funding, that's the blue, the state funding, that's the yellow, and then the green, that's the gap. And you see how big that gap is, that local rural communities are being expected to come up with 51% of the funding to keep their agencies going. They don't have it. It's just not there. And we are going to see deep cuts if that doesn't get corrected. And it can be corrected by the state increasing the amount that they're returning to those communities. Finally, our request, and I think you'll all know what it is. We hope that, and it's only one, we hope that, and we request that LBO be restored to the 2023-2024 level of $261 million. We can keep doing the work we're doing, and we can keep advancing and growing on it if we have that money and we're not worried about how we're going to keep the lights on. And then we hope that eventually we'll reach that full statutory ceiling of 50% and 60% that really would make transit in our state run the way that it can and should be. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your testimony, Harmony. I appreciated the background and just learning about the externalities of transit and obviously the demand that exists and the benefit it provides to communities. And I think just a summation of a lot of our conversations today is just the demand's there. We just need to find funding source to adequately fund these initiatives. We're going to kind of stick to the plan here and go on cruise control. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to please ask any questions of Harmony offline. Harmony, again, thanks for coming up and joining us. We're going to get into the next speaker, who will be Megan Owens from the Transportation Riders United. Megan, please limit to I think 3 minutes here. Thank you.
That should work. And I did pass out two sheets that hopefully add a little more to what I'm going to share. And I share this on behalf of the thousands of riders, hundreds of members, and dozens of allied organizations we work with. For decades, public transportation has really been an afterthought for most legislatures. They maintained a tiny sliver of funding to ensure that seniors weren't stranded in their homes when they retired from driving, but transit has been left out of major increases in other forms of funding and in other transportation bonds. And I want to say to you, Michigan cannot afford to make transit an afterthought anymore. One of the fact sheets shares at least 20 different data points as to why transit's essential, not just to seniors and people with disabilities and working families, but also to economic development and health and safety and so much more. I want to spotlight 3 of those quickly. First of all, the governor has made it a high priority to make life more affordable for the people of Michigan. And yet most Michigan families spend more than 20% of their entire household budget just to drive around the places that they need to go. And as WXYZ reported just yesterday, a lot of Michiganders are struggling to maintain a car for every single person over 15 in their household. So in order to make Michigan a truly affordable place for young people and for families to live, we've got to invest in realistic, convenient alternatives to everyone having a car. Transit has to be a major budget priority, not an afterthought. Second, the Growing Michigan Together Council said transit's essential to retain and to attract young professionals. Heck, I've had 3 different brilliant young people join my board of directors, ready to make a difference, and leave within 2 years to move to Boston and DC, where they can afford to live without paying for both a car on top of student loans and other fees. If we don't want the U-Haul to be the official vehicle of Michigan's young professionals, then transit cannot be an afterthought. And third, the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan said we need to expand transit access by 15% a year just to meet the state's climate commitments. To expand transit access, we have to expand the budget by at least that much. And yet the governor's budget proposal recommends just a 2% increase, really a budgetary afterthought. As MDOT explained, the cost of operating transit in Michigan went up by 9% last year to maintain a competitive workforce, to deal with inflation, et cetera. So in order to not move backwards on transit, the local bus operating budget has to increase by at least 9%. And if we're going to really follow through on Michigan's commitments and to make Michigan an affordable and attractive place where people want to live and work and invest, you must provide public transit agencies more than just survival level investments, but to truly invest in excellent service.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony and the expedited version of it. So thank you. We're going to stick on cruise control here and jump into Steve Solis, the President of the ATU Local 1039 Lansing, and Melvin Turnbow, President of ATU Local 836 from Grand Rapids. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Please keep it to 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Chairman Pooley and members of the subcommittee. My name is Steve Solis. I'm the president and business agent of ATU Local 1039 in Lansing, Michigan. Mr. Turnbow is the president of Grand Rapids ATU Local 836 for the Interurban Transit Partnership in Grand Rapids. And we have been selected by our peers from all around the state, from SMART, Detroit, Kalamazoo, Jackson, Battle Creek, to speak to you guys today. So much of what I had prepared has already been said, so it makes this a whole lot easier. I'm going to just hopefully just speak to fellow people interested in doing what we can for transit. I've been a bus operator 34 years. I rode the bus as a kid. It made a difference. Here's what I see day to day on the street. We have seniors using it at a higher rate than ever. We have students using it at a higher rate than ever. And more importantly, we're running into people who are in the 20s and even early 30s, relying on public transportation in a different way because of affordability. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was everybody's saying that the local bus operating. Guys, we can have all the buses in the world and the fanciest bus stops and all the nicest buildings. It doesn't mean anything if there's not funding for somebody to operate that bus, fix that bus, make sure it's safe. We run into staffing issues, huge staffing issues all around the state. And it becomes even a safety issue when folks are required to work many more than 40 hours a week just to provide the minimum levels of service we're at. Pre-pandemic, we carried far more people than we're carrying right now, and last year was over 30 million people. 2013 in Lansing, the CATA system, Lansing, East Lansing Meridian, was over 11 million. I mean, so these numbers are going to increase very rapidly, very soon. The funding is not meeting the needs. So somebody asked earlier about what about an idea to fix it? One thing that I have an elementary education on, but strikes me, is the auto-related sales tax. I'm not trying to steal money from rail or shipping or anybody else. I think everybody here understands that they're all important aspects of our transportation systems. But what we need is to get more money in that fund, and we need creative ideas to try to reach that solution. Younger folks, retaining the younger people we have in the system has been a real challenge. Largely due to forced overtime, mandatory nights, weekend shifts. They want a work-life balance. These are all issues that can be addressed with funding, with proper training, and we asked today to take a good look at the line item veto, or line item local bus operations, and that's what I have. Nothing?
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Thank you, Chairman Puri, for having us here. I echo exactly what President Solis has said as well. I'm from the Grand Rapids area, so when the gentleman there said he was represents Kenton County, and I just jumped for joy, within my seat. We're having and experiencing some of the same issues across the region as everyone else. It's okay to, purchase buses and refurbish our facilities, but at the same time, we have to realize that we have a serious crisis of workers not being available. And by increasing that local bus funding formula line item would help that tremendously. A lot of our bus operators are working serious overtime just to meet family needs. And these are the things that we're trying to change. I heard we have employers in the region that need their employees to get to their jobs. But in the Grand Rapids area, we have cut the services, so we're not able to get them to their jobs. Some passengers have complained to me as a bus operator that they have to go in, 2 and 3 hours earlier because that bus that they were depending on later in the evening is just not available. So they're having to go in early just to sit around so they make sure they're at work on time. These service cuts has affected that as well. Pre-COVID, we were okay, that we had the late night service, but since that service had been eliminated, since COVID, that service has been eliminated. So we're not having the amount of buses out there that we were in the past. So those are the things that we're advocating for, is to increase that funding and to meet the needs not only of our passengers, but also of our bus operators, because they are working tremendous amounts of overtime and not being able to spend time with their families and things of that nature. So I really do encourage you to increase that funding. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you both. Thank you for coming into town to testify. Appreciate.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate your testimony. We'll move right along to Steve Vagnozzi, the Government Affairs Coordinator for the Michigan Association of Railroad Passengers. Steve, hopefully I got your last name right. And just as the previous presenters, please limit to 4 minutes.
Okay. I'm Steve Vagnozzi. I'm the Government Affairs Chair of the 50-year-old Michigan Association of Railroad Passengers, and I'm here today to give you a quick comparison and demonstration of the positive effects of increased frequencies. What we put together was a comparison between the state of Michigan service between Detroit, Pontiac, and Chicago, the Wolverine, and the equivalent train in North Carolina called the Piedmont, which is Charlotte to Raleigh. As you look at the Wolverine side of this chart, we've been at the same number of trains since, well before 2005. And you can see every time on the right side, they added a train in North Carolina between Charlotte and Raleigh. When they went from 1 to 2, they had a 116% increase in ridership. When they went from 2 to 3, they had a 46% increase in ridership. When they went to 3 to 4, they had a 21% increase in ridership. Those pale if you look at the overall comparison. Essentially, we've been stagnant. We have the same riderships in 2023 that we had in 2005. They have 500%, 5 times the ridership that we had. So if you're interested, in the interest of time, my contact information is on this sheet. I'd be happy to meet with either you or your staff to further clarify. I do want to add that we are in the golden opportunity to add service in Michigan. And the reason I say that is one of the federal programs out of the IIJ provides startups operating support. Today, the state of Michigan gets nothing from the federal government for passenger rail. Under one of the many grants that they created was an operational startup declining support grant so that we could start with federal match as high as 80 to 90%, declining over 6 years. So that's an opportunity that we can't afford to miss. I'd be happy to answer questions about some of the that were raised earlier. If you reach out to me, I'm going to stop now in the interest of time.
I appreciate you being timely with your presentation, stopping right on time there. This is an interesting analysis you provided. We'll be reaching out to discuss further.
And there is details behind it, but I didn't want to burden everybody with that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Steve. Appreciate your testimony. There were a couple other presenters today. Unfortunately, we're going to cut it off here. We do have a hard stop, so I'm sorry to the presenters that we weren't able to get through. And thank you all for our speakers today. We're going to continue to try to have these conversations with this. Representative Morgan, welcome back. Moves to excuse absent members. Without objection, it is so ordered. With no further business, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you.